So I have been out of the garden for 9 days. We went on a vacation. It was wonderful. We had a great time. However, the garden over those 9 days that I was gone has just exploded. When I left, these cucumbers were about down here, and there was no fruit that I could harvest. And just yesterday, I harvested 7 cucumbers, and it looks like I have at least 2 more ready. There's probably more I have not checked quite yet. But they also are growing very crazy, and so our first task of today is going to be trellising not only our cucumbers, but a lot of our plants that have grown substantially since I left. So I have some tomatoes that we are going to trellis up, and these cucumbers, and then I've also got some butternut squash that we need to trellis up. And how we're going to do that is just use some twine, and I've got a little pair of baby scissors. So this is definitely a process, especially with cucumbers, because they like to grow their own way, and they have their tendrils that wrap around, and so you have to be really careful to unwrap the tendrils so that it doesn't damage the plant. So you can see I just took that one off. Here it is, and I'm just going to move it over to this other side because I have beans growing on the other half of this trellis, and these cucumbers can take those beans over really quick. And while I love cucumbers, I also love beans as well, and I would like to have a decent crop of beans and a decent crop of cucumbers. Now some of these tendrils are just really hard to save. You're not going to be able to save every tendril. I try, but some of them are just hooked on there so well that you really can't. And that is where our twine comes in. I just got face to face with a bee. So here I'm just going to take my twine, take a little cutting of it. And I'm going to very loosely tie it. I don't want to suffocate the plant. And I also want to make sure that if the plant gets bigger, this twine is not going to suffocate it and make it stop growing. Okay, I have finished trellising up these cucumbers for today. They're still definitely crazy, and you can tell that there's a big old clump of them right here. I didn't realize how many were growing that way, and so they will resituate themselves to start growing this way and hopefully growing up to fill this trellis, because I think a trellis with cucumbers coming down would be so pretty. So right now I am in our tomato trellis, and these tomatoes have also grown like crazy. On this side, we have all of our slicing tomatoes. So I have giant Belgian tomatoes, pineapple tomatoes, brandywine or vintage pink tomatoes, and they are growing like crazy. There's a huge cluster down here, which I am very excited about. And then on my right side, I have all of our Roma tomatoes. Now, Roma tomatoes are sauce tomatoes. You don't need to have them separate. It's just my preference so I can remember which side is which. But our Romas are a little bit slower than our slicer tomatoes are. I'm not entirely sure why, because normally it is the other way around. But they're both producing, they're both healthy, so I'm not going to question it. I'm just going to trellis. When you're trellising your tomatoes, you want to have the same thought process as when you're trellising your cucumbers. You want to make sure that your twine, or whatever it is that you are using to tie your tomatoes to your trellis, is not going to end up being too tight. Tomato stems can get pretty thick, and you really want to make sure that you are not cutting off their circulation, so to speak, because that will lead to a dead plant. Now, don't get super nervous about this. It's really hard to cut off the circulation of a plant. It's just something to be a little cautious about while you are actively trellising up your plants. So this is the first year that we've done a cattle panel style trellis for our tomatoes. Last year we did a floor weave, and I did like the floor weave. We just didn't have enough space to plant all the tomatoes that we wanted in that floor weave. And so this year we bought a couple more cattle panels, and I have seen some people try tomatoes on a cattle panel and really like it, and so I decided that this year we were going to give it a try. So far it's okay. It is difficult to keep all of our plants on the actual trellis. They grow so vigorously that we have to come out here very often to keep our plants up, tie our plants up. And we had to do that with a Florida weave as well, but they were a little bit more self-stable, like they could grow up and we wouldn't have to tie them as much. It's definitely not too bad, and it allows me to take a closer look at my plants. So I'm not too mad about it, but that is a con if you were thinking about a cattle panel trellis versus a Florida weave. A bonus though is that these cattle panels are much sturdier than our Florida weave. We had some big storms last year that came through and knocked a couple of branches off our tomatoes while they were on that Florida weave. Had they been on a cattle panel, I don't know that they would have been knocked off. A lot of people choose to use tomato cages for their tomatoes, and I think that that's a good idea if you are doing determinate tomatoes. And determinate tomatoes are tomatoes that have a determined height, so typically they don't get over 4 or 5 feet. However, my tomatoes are indeterminate, which means that they don't have a determined height, and so they will continue to grow throughout the entire season until that first frost hits in like 4 months. And so these tomatoes, especially my slicing tomatoes, Rubas are a little bit different, but these slicing tomatoes eventually will grow up and around the top. It's so beautiful when it happens, especially if you have those bright red tomatoes. But those cages only get so tall. Where did my scissors go? But those cages only get so tall, and after a certain height, your tomatoes will just outgrow the cages, and then you'll have to figure out something else to do. So this is my butternut squash plant, and I am so excited that it's growing this year. This is the first year ever that I have been able to grow any sort of squash, and I think it's because we had a really cold and rainy spring, and so the squash bugs didn't have as much time to come out yet. And in the meantime, wheel bugs came in, and if you don't know, wheel bugs actually eat squash bugs and their squash bug eggs. A butternut squash, or really any type of squash, does need to have some good airflow, or else it can be susceptible to something called powdery mildew. But it also needs to be able to attract pollinators, and it does that by getting itself close up into the sky so that pollinators can make sure that they see it. Now, as you can see, this squash flower is open, and I actually did hand pollinate this one this morning, along with a couple of others, but I only did that to make sure that it would get pollinated, because it was low sitting. This butternut squash was laying on the ground, and because of that, the bugs are not always able to see it. I want to make sure that I give it as much support as I can, just until its tendrils find the bars and it recalibrates, so to speak, towards the sun. So I'm getting a little sidetracked here, but I found some squash bug eggs, and these are just about ready to hatch. You see how they're kind of bubbly and they're brown? We got to get these off. And those are the perpetrators. So now that I took these off, they're going to go in a plastic baggie, like a Ziploc, and they're going in the trash. But if I had a flamethrower, I would burn them. So today I'm going to give my plants another fertilizing, mainly our peppers and our tomatoes. And I'm going to use this Tiger's Bloom. Normally I would not like using a synthetic fertilizer, but I ran out of my fish fertilizer, and that is what I normally use, and so this is what we are substituting with today. It is a good fertilizer, but I try and stay away from synthetic fertilizer because, one, they're not long lasting. We'll have to re-fertilize about every other week or so with a synthetic fertilizer, and two, a lot of them can break down your soil's microbiome, and we don't want that. We've been building it up for a long time, and organic fertilizer can really help build up our soil microbiome, but synthetic fertilizers often just fry it, and so that's not what we want. So 1 gallon took half of this bed. I'm gonna be here a little while. So there's one more thing that I wanted to do before I get burned alive, because it is hot. It's only 10 a.m. but that sun is blistering and I am sweating. So I'm going to start pruning our tomatoes. Now I do this for a couple of reasons. One, if we have leaves like this one that is diseased or has some sort of spotting on it, we want to get rid of that as fast as we can, because it could be harboring disease, and disease could spread to the rest of our plants, and then we've got a problem. I also try and get rid of these leaves to maximize airflow. So going back to disease, something that I'll talk about a lot when it comes to tomatoes is fungus and disease. The better the airflow on your tomato, the less likely you are to have disease and fungus. So here you can see I have not pruned my tomatoes for at least 9 days, because that's how long I've been gone, but actually it's a lot longer than that. And so we are going to give them a big prune. Now here I have some of my little kid scissors again, and I am going to use these to prune, but I'm going to make sure that I sterilize them between each plant so that I don't spread disease from one plant to another. Now you can do this by using an alcohol wipe or lighting them on fire for a second. You can sterilize them however you would like, but do make sure that you sterilize them, because you will spread disease. Also wash your hands. So here for my first plant, you can see that there's a lot of foliage on it. Obviously that disease leaf is going to go, but I'm going to do that one last so that I don't spread disease to the rest of the plant, or I guess speed up the process of disease. Obviously the first thing we're going to look for is diseased leaves, but the second that we're going to look for is these suckers. Now you don't necessarily have to prune every sucker on your tomatoes, but in a case like this where I'm really needing some extra airflow, I'm going to. Now you also are not going to want to do this on determinate plants, because these suckers are part of that determined amount of fruit that you're going to get. When it comes to these indeterminate plants, you can take off a sucker and a new one will pop up right away, and that'll be your new fruit, and that's okay. But you don't want to do that on a determinate plant. I also like to clear the bottom leaves just to make sure that we have some airflow towards the bottom, and so here I'm going to snip. Hey, it was the diseased branch, and you can see it really is a diseased branch. But I'm going to go ahead and snip these bottom branches off, just because they are the most susceptible to disease, and we just want to make sure that our odds are as good as possible. And I will come back to you when I have all of these done. Okay, this is the pile that I took. As you can see, doesn't look like there's much of a difference, but I promise that there is. The airflow around the bottom of our tomatoes is much better. And I have also removed any of these yellowing leaves and these diseased leaves. Obviously, you can tell it's diseased because it's yellow, but if you look, there are spots on the back of it. That will be your first telltale sign. And I don't know what happened with these. I think hail maybe got to it, or some sort of bug. Either way, we took it off. Now, some of these look fine except for one leaf. I just took the whole branch because it's most likely infected. And then we also have leaves like this one, which is not infected. There's no signs of infection on it. I just took it because it was either in my space or it was blocking the plant from getting really good airflow. Now, you are not going to want to put this in a compost pile under almost any circumstance unless they are completely disease-free and you are sure of it. These are going to go either in a burn pile or in my trash, and I'm going to wash my hands before touching anything else in the garden. I think that is where I'm going to call the video for today. It is getting so hot outside and I have to get ready for work soon anyways. But I feel like we got a pretty good amount done. We pruned all of our tomatoes, fertilized pretty much everything you see behind me and in front of me, and we're able to trellis up these crazy cucumbers and these crazy tomatoes behind me. If you like this video, please remember to leave it a thumbs up and comment down below with what kind of video you would like to see next, or if you have any questions. Till next time, happy gardening!